सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen तो.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
From behind the thick stone walls of Jerusalem's Markaz Harav Seminary, late one November night in 1947, Rabbi Zvi Yehuda Kook watched the birth of his nation and sorrowed. Far away in New York's Flushing Meadow, the United Nations General Assembly had just voted to partition mandatory Palestine into new Jewish and Arab states. In Tel Aviv, jubilant Jews celebrated on the streets. The cleric did not join them. They divided my land, Kook would later write. Where is each clod of dirt, each piece of the Lord's land? Last week, the political heirs of Kook's vision of Israel as a messianic project to enable Jewish victory over their historic enemies and the establishment of the Third Temple in Jerusalem stormed to power in a general election that could reshape the country's destiny. Elected Prime Minister at the head of a coalition dominated by the religious right wing, the return of the scandal-tainted Benjamin Netanyahu has sparked fears among many Israelis that the country has lost a fateful battle for its soul. Though claims that Israel will dissolve into an authoritarian theocracy may prove overblown, coalition partners are vowing to embed religion deeper into Israeli civic life and to limit the rights of women and LGBTQ+ citizens. Liberal Israel seems set to become much more like its illiberal Middle East neighbors. Far-right leaders like religious Zionism party chief Itamar Ben-Gvir, who is demanding to be made public security minister, have called for disloyal Arab citizens to be expelled from Israel. 15 years ago, Ben-Gvir was even convicted of inciting racism and supporting Kach, a terrorist organization that sought to transform Israel into a theocratic state. Kach sought to ban Jews from marrying Arabs and even segregate them on beaches. Last year, Ben-Gvir mobilized against Palestinians resisting eviction from their homes and appeared alongside Jewish vigilantes during riots. At one recent rally, young Ben-Gvir supporters raised racist chants directed at Arabs. "Your village should burn." Like so many 20th century nationalist movements, Zionism drew inspiration from eclectic ideological tendencies, including the European right wing. Led by ideologues like Uri Zvi Greenberg, the Zionist far right held that Imperial Britain had betrayed its 1917 promise to support the establishment in Palestine of a Jewish national home. For the religious right, independence could only be seized through armed struggle, as it had been in countries like Ireland, Italy, and Poland. The Zionists of the far right, author Ehud Sprinsnak has argued, imagine the foundations for armed struggle to lie deep in Jewish history. The cause of Israel for them involved a romantic glorification of the old days of blood, soil, heroism, and conquest. For Vladimir Jabotinsky, founder of the influential Betar youth movement, a revisionist Zionist project, this meant the cultivation of a militaristic culture through pilgrimages to ancient battlefields like Masada and Tel Hai. Faced with the implosion of Eastern European democracies, many young Zionists turned for inspiration to successful ethnic nationalist movements sweeping the region. The East European youth cohort drawn into Betar, author and professor Daniel Heller writes, embraced a range of convictions and values that they themselves described as fascist. The Israel they sought could only be forged, he says, from a total ideology covering all aspects of human experience to inspire personal sacrifice, instill discipline, order, and unity. Elements of the Zionist far right, among them the paramilitary leader Abraham Stern, were even seduced by their belief that national renewal could only be obtained through blood and fire into a bizarre attempt to seek an alliance with the Axis powers led by Nazi Germany. For most of the Zionist movement, though, these tendencies were largely irrelevant. Following the formation of Israel, left-leaning labor Zionism condemned the right to the margins of national politics. Through the 1950s, some far-right groups did conduct terrorist attacks, among other things, attacking non-kosher butcher shops, burning cars driven on the Sabbath, and more seriously, bombing the Soviet consulate in Tel Aviv. Israel's domestic intelligence services, researchers Ami Pedahzur and Ari Perliger have recorded, largely succeeded in crushing these threats. Following the 1967 Arab-Israeli War, the politician and independence struggle terrorist Menachem Begin emerged at the center stage of Israeli politics, arguing against territorial compromise with the Arabs. Following decades in the wilderness, Begin was elected Prime Minister in 1977. He promised more Jewish settlements in the occupied territories. The religious right cheered. The Arabs had and have absolutely no national right to the land, the cleric Cook argued. If they deny the justice of our cause, we must persuade them with our tanks. In September 1978, though, Prime Minister Begin signed the historic Camp David Peace Accord, returning the Sinai to Egypt and promising autonomy for Palestinians in the West Bank. The peace deal ended up re-energizing the religious right in Israel. A new generation of young activists for whom Israel was not just a nation-state to be defended but a messianic project, challenged the Camp David Agreement on the streets. Led most visibly by the American-born Orthodox cleric Meir Kahane and his Kach party, the far right cast Begin as a traitor. Kahane, Professor Shaul Majid has written, argued that Israel's constitution, which promised equal rights to residents of the Jewish state irrespective of their race or religion, was unacceptable. Equality for Arabs, he argued, would inevitably undermine its Jewish character. Following the peace deal, Kahane's increasingly expressed racism fueled ugly clashes between his followers and Arabs. Followers of the settlement movement, Gush Emunim, went even further, attempting to assassinate the Arab mayors of 3 West Bank cities in 1980, staging a shooting at an Islamic college 3 years later, and even plotting to bomb Arab bus commuters in 1984. The group was also found to be planning to blow up the Dome of the Rock on Jerusalem's Temple Mount, the third most sacred place in Islam. The Begin government, determined not to resile on its Camp David promises, dug in against the right. In 1982, thousands of troops were ordered to remove Jewish settlements in Sinai in the face of fierce resistance from the religious right. 12 Kahane followers even locked themselves in an underground shelter filled with gas tanks, threatening mass suicide. Elsewhere, radicals considered armed resistance to the Israeli state. Kahane's organization was barred from running for Israel's parliament in 1988. The far right was again consigned to the margins. But not for long. Another peace deal, the Oslo Agreements of 1993, which saw then Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin recognize the Palestine Liberation Organization, would revive the far right yet again. Figures like Ben Gvir, who as a teenager appeared on television threatening to kill Rabin just weeks before the Prime Minister was actually assassinated by a zealot, seemed to many Israelis to represent a lunatic fringe. Then chairman of the Likud party, Netanyahu, however, sensed a seismic shift in Israeli politics was underway. The ultra-Orthodox Haredi community, undereducated and underemployed, was growing into a powerful electoral bloc. Likud leaders largely distanced themselves from the hate polemic targeting Prime Minister Rabin. Netanyahu did not. Likud had risen to power on the back of votes from Middle Eastern and North African Jews, who author Zachary Harris notes had been consigned to Israel's developmental and geographical margins. Prime Minister Begin had positioned himself as a defender of their values and rights against those of elite urban liberals. This anti-elite posture was transformed by Netanyahu into a new kind of religion-powered populism. Through his many years in office, Netanyahu normalized extremism. Former Minister Avigdor Lieberman proposed shifting Israeli Arab citizens into Palestinian territories. And former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, who was then a Netanyahu ally, called for annexing parts of the West Bank. Ethno-religious chauvinism was also given legitimacy by Netanyahu's support of the so-called National State Law of 2018. This law, for the first time, elevated Jewish collective rights over individual political rights conferred as a matter of citizenship. The law, authors Julius Rogenhofer and Alaya Panievsky write, marked a major shift away from Israel's long-standing commitment to Western-style liberal democratic norms. Israel today is, in many senses, more secure than at any point in its past. The country has crushed terrorist groups like Islamic Jihad in Gaza and successfully hunted down the perpetrators of terrorist violence. The Abraham Accords with the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain and Morocco have prepared the grounds for a wider normalization of relations with the Arab world. Even Lebanon has just signed a maritime cooperation agreement, and key rival Iran remains internationally isolated. The flowering of Israel's new ethno-religious politics will jeopardize these gains. Ever more embittered since that November night partition in 1947, Palestinians are now living in what the scholar Oren Yiftakel has called a state of creeping apartheid. The promise of a two-state solution involving a sovereign Israel and Palestine died years ago. The rise of the right now also renders impossible a secular binationalism which would allow Israelis and Palestinians to coexist under the umbrella of one nation-state. Israel's election will thus perpetuate the long, grinding conflict that has claimed so many of the country's people. I'm Praveen Swami. I'm National Security Editor of ThePrint. Thank you for watching Security Code.